back to Speducation. I am your host, Brandon Reed, and as always, if this is your first time to the channel, a special welcome to you. Well, it's a new week and a new lesson. So, what are we going to be learning about this week? Today's lesson, is it a language barrier or a learning disability? So I've worked at a lot of different schools, and the one question that I get asked probably more than any other is when it comes to language learners. A lot of teachers will ask me, I think the student has a learning disability, but I don't know if it's because they have a language barrier or if it's an actual learning disability. What is the difference? Can you explain it to me? Well, actually, that's a good question, and it has a simple answer. Before we can understand what the difference is between them, we have to understand what they are. So first, a language barrier. It's defined as a difficulty for people communicating because they speak different languages. A learning disability is defined as a disorder in one or more basic psychological processes that may manifest itself as an imperfect ability in certain areas of learning. The best way to determine if a student has a learning disability who is also a student that speaks a different language is teach that student the same lesson in their own language. If they're able to understand it, then they don't have a learning disability. But if they still struggle, then they have a learning disability. It's as simple as that. If only it was that simple. Unfortunately, it is still difficult to determine if a student has a learning disability or if it's just a language barrier. And the reason why is because in order to service students that have learning disabilities, we have to hire special ed teachers. But in order to help those students that may not necessarily speak English, we have to hire translators and interpreters. All too often, we feel reliant on students, their siblings, extra familial members, or bilingual staff to provide these services. According to the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights in January in 2015, doing so violates a parent's rights as we must provide translation or interpretation from appropriate and competent individuals. Which makes sense because you wouldn't necessarily want somebody who knows nothing about special ed to be teaching your child. Now, there are instructional assistants that don't have necessarily the background in special ed that a special ed teacher does, but they do get trained on it. This is basically like saying, we're just going to pick somebody off the street, put them into the role, and say, there you go, with no training whatsoever. And that's basically what we're talking about. We have individuals that work within the building that can translate, but they're not professionals. And trying to teach as well as translate, that's actually pretty difficult. So that's the problem that we face. And unfortunately, even though it's a simple solution, it's something that's not going to get resolved overnight. So, if you liked what you saw, you learned something new, or you're new to the channel, please click that like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, if you have questions or comments, or there's a particular topic in special ed that you would like me to cover, by all means, drop a line in the comments section, and I would love to talk about it. And until next time, class dismissed.